Doom, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Oh, dum, 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 ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the next thrilling episode of the astounding, mysterious, amazing, ebullient, effulgent, red cow from another world reading bedtime stories show thing that this is. And today we're continuing with part two of the amazing Coriolanus. If you remember last time, Coriolanus slashed his way into the city of the Corioli of the Volscians, slaughtered them, and then he ran outside because he didn't want to miss a chance to slaughter them wherever else they might be. So his buddies were just giving each other their last will and testament before their battle when up comes Coriolanus, Gaius Marcius at this time, because they didn't call him Coriolanus yet, not until afterwards. Uh, you learn something new every day. But yeah, he was like all covered in blood and disgusting gore. So they were not a little disturbed by his first appearance, seeing him covered with blood and sweat and attended with a small train. But when he hastily made up to the consul with gladness in his looks, giving him his hand and recounting to him how the city had been taken, and when they saw Cominius also embrace and salute him, uh, everyone took fresh heart, those that were near enough hearing, and those that were at a distance guessing what happened, and all cried out to be led to battle. First, however, Marcius desired to know of him how the Volscians had arrayed their army, and where they had placed their best men. On his answering that, he took the troops of the Antiates to the center to be their prime warriors that would yield to none in bravery. Let me demand and obtain of you, said Marcius, that we may be boasted against them. The consul granted the request with much admiration for his gallantry, and when the conflict began, by the soldiers darting at each other, and Marcius sallied out before the rest of Volscian opposed to him were not able to make head against him. Wherever he fell in, he broke their ranks and made them a lane through him because he was crazy. But the parties, turning again and enclosing him on each side with their weapons, the consul, who observed the danger he was in, dispatched some of the choicest men he had for his rescue. The conflict then growing warm and sharp about Marcius, and many falling dead in a little space, the Romans bore so hard upon their enemies and pressed them in such violence that they forced them at length to abandon their ground and to quit the field. Run away! Run away! In going now to prosecute the victory, they besought Marcius, tired out with his toils and faint and heavy through the loss of blood, that he would retire to the camp. He replied, however, that weariness was not for conquerors, and joined them in the pursuit. The rest of the Volscian army was in like manner defeated, great numbers killed, and no less taken captive. The day after, when Marcius with the rest of the army presented himself at the consul's tent, Cominius rose, and having rendered all due acknowledgment to the gods for the success of that enterprise, turned next to Marcius, and first of all delivered the strongest encomium upon his rare exploits, which he had partly been an eyewitness of himself in the late battle, and had partly learned from the testimony of Lartius, and then he required him to choose a tenth part of all the treasure and horses and captives that had fallen into their hands before any division could be made to others. Besides which, he made him a special present of a horse with trappings and ornaments in honor of his actions. The whole army applauded. Marcius, however, stepped forth and declaring his thankful acceptance of the horse and his gratification of the praises of the general, said that all other things which he could only regard rather as mercenary advantages than any significations of honor he must waive, and should be content with the ordinary proportion of such rewards. I have only, said he, one special grace to beg, and this I hope you will not deny me, for there was a certain hospitable friend of mine among the Volscians, a man of probity and virtue, who has become a prisoner, and from former wealth and freedom is now reduced to servitude. Among his many misfortunes, let my intercession redeem him from the one of being sold as a common slave. Such a refusal and such a request on the part of Marcius were followed with yet louder acclamations, and he had many more admirers of his generous superiority to the avarice than of the bravery he had shown in battle. The very persons who conceived some envy and despite to see him so specially honored could not but acknowledge that one who so nobly could refuse reward was beyond others worthy to receive it, and were more charmed with that virtue which made him despise advantage than with any of those former actions that have gained him his title to it. It is the higher accomplishment to use money well than to use arms, but not to need it is more noble than to use it. Think about it, folks. When the noise of approbation and applause ceased, Cominius, resuming, said, "It is idle, fellow soldiers, to force and obtrude those other gifts of ours on one who is unwilling to accept them. Let us therefore give him one of such a kind that he cannot well reject it. Let us pass a vote. I mean that he shall hereafter be called Coriolanus, unless you think that his performance at Corioli has itself anticipated any such resolution." Hence, therefore, he had his third name of Coriolanus, making it all the plainer that Gaius was a personal proper name, and the second or surname Marcius, one common to his house and family, the third being a subsequent addition which used to be imposed either from some particular act of fortune, bodily characteristic, or good quality of the bearer, just as the Greeks too, by the way, in case you ever wondered about it, just as the Greeks too gave additional names in old time, in some cases from some achievement, Soter, for example, and Callinicus, or personal appearance, as Physcon and Grypus. Good qualities, Euergetes, and Philadelphus. Good fortune, Eudaemon, the title of the second Battus. Several monarchs have also had names given them in mockery, as Antigonus was called Doson and Ptolemy Lathyrus. This sort of title was yet more common among the Romans. One of the Metelli was surnamed Diadematus because he walked about for a long time with a bandage on his head to conceal a scar. And another of the same family got the name of Sella from the rapidity he displayed in giving a funeral entertainment of gladiators within a few days after his father's death. His speed and energy in doing which was thought extraordinary. There are some, too, who even at this day take names from certain casual incidents at their nativity. A child that is born when his father is away is called Proculus or Posthumus, if after his decease. And when twins come into the world and one dies at the birth, the survivor has the name of Opiscus. From bodily peculiarities, they derive not only their Scyllas and Nigers, but Ceci and Claudii, wisely endeavoring to accustom their people not to reckon either the loss of sight or any other bodily misfortune as a matter of disgrace to them, but to answer to such names without shame as if they were really their own. But this discussion, uh, what are we doing here? We're like on another planet. I mean, what happened to the story? Okay, but this discussion befits whatever another place. It's not what we were talking about. The war against the Volscians. The war against the Vulcans was no sooner at an end than the popular orators revived domestic troubles and raised another sedition without any new cause or complaint or just grievance to proceed upon, but merely turning the very mischiefs that unavoidably ensued from their former contest into the pretext against the patricians. They always blame the government. Yeah. The the greatest part of their arable land had been left unsown and without tillage because they were at a war. Mm, yeah, whose fault was that? And the time of war allowing them no means or leisure to import provision from other countries, there was an extreme scarcity. So they had this pretext they made up, some pretext of starvation, right? Read between the lines, folks. Uh, The movers of the people then observing that there was no corn to be bought, and that if there had been, they had no money to buy it, they began to calumniate the wealthy with false stories, and whisper it about as if they, out of their malice, had purposely contrived the famine. Meanwhile, there came an embassy from the Velitrani proposing to deliver up their city to the Romans and desiring they would send some new inhabitants to people it, as a late pestilential disease had swept away so many of the natives that there was hardly a tenth part remaining in their whole community. This necessity of the Velitrani was considered by all the more prudent people as most opportune in the present state of affairs, since the dearth made it needful to ease the city of its superfluous members, and they were in hope also at the same time to dissipate the gathering sedition by ridding themselves of the more violent and heated partisans, and discharging, so to say, the elements of disease and disorder in the state. The consuls, therefore, singled out such citizens to supply the desolation of the Velitrae, and gave notice to others that they should be ready to march against the Volscians with the politic design of preventing intestine broils by employment abroad, and in the hope that when the rich as well as poor plebeians and patricians should be mingled again in the same army and in the same camp and engaged in one common service for the public, it would mutually dispose them to reconciliation, friendship. But Sicinius, and Brutus, the popular orators, interposed, crying out that the consuls disguised the most cruel and barbarous action in the world under that mild and plausible name of a colony, and we're simply precipitating so many poor citizens into a mere pit of destruction, bidding them settle down in a country where the air was charged with disease and the ground covered with dead bodies, and expose themselves to the evil influence of a strange and angered deity, and then, as if it would not satisfy their hatred, to destroy some by hunger and offer others to the mercy of the plague, they must proceed to involve them also in a needless war of their own making, that no calamity might be wanting to complete the punishment of the citizens for refusing to submit to that of slavery to the rich. That's what you get. By such addresses, the people were so possessed that none of them would appear upon the consular summons to be enlisted for the war, and they showed entire aversion to the proposal for a new plantation, so that the Senate was at a loss but what to say or do. But Marcius, who began now to bear himself higher and to feel confidence in his past actions, conscious too of the admiration of the best and greatest men of Rome, openly took the lead in opposing the favorers of the people. The colony was dispatched to Velitrae, those who were chosen by lot being compelled to depart upon high penalties. And when they obstinately persisted in refusing to enroll themselves in the Volscian service, he mustered up his own clients and as many others as could be wrought upon by persuasion, and with these made an inroad into the territories of the Antiotes, where, finding a considerable quantity of corn and collecting much booty, both of cattle and prisoners, he reserved nothing for himself in private, but returned safe to Rome, while those that ventured out with him were seen laden with pillage and driving their prey before them. This sight filled those that had stayed at home with regret for their perverseness, with envy at their fortunate fellow citizens, and with feelings of dislike to Marcius and hostility to his growing reputation and power, which might probably be used against the popular unrest. Not long after he stood for the consulship, when, however, the people began to uh, when, however, the people began to relent and incline to favor him, being sensible what a shame it would be to repulse and affront a man of his birth and merit after he had done them so many signal services, it was usual for those who stood for offices among them to solicit and address themselves personally to the citizens, presenting themselves in the forum with the toga on alone and no tunic under it, either to promote their supplications by the humility of their dress, or that such as had received wounds might more readily display those marks of their fortitude. Certainly, it was not out of suspicion of bribery and corruption that they required all such petitioners for their favor to appear ungirt and open without any close garment, as it was much later, and many ages after this, that buying and selling them crept in at their elections, and money became an ingredient in the public suffrages, proceeding thence to attempt their tribunals, and even attack their camps, till by hiring the valiant and enslaving iron to silver, it grew master of the state, and turned their commonwealth into a monarchy. For it was well and truly said that the first destroyer of the liberties of the people is he who first gave them bounties and largesses. Think about it, folks. At Rome, the mischief seems to have stolen secretly in, and by little and little, not being at once discerned and taken notice of, it is not certainly known who the man was that did there first either bribe the citizens or corrupt the courts, whereas in Athens Anytus the son of Anthemion is said to have been the first that gave money to the judges. When on his trial toward the latter end of the Peloponnesian War, for letting the fort of Pylos fall into the hands of the enemy in a period while the pure and golden race of men were still in possession of the Roman Forum. Marcius, therefore, as the fashion as the fashion of candidates was, showing the scars and gashes that were still visible on his body from the many conflicts in which he had signalized himself during the service of 17 years together, they were, so to say, put out of countenance at this display of merit, and told one another that uh, that they ought, in common modesty, to create him consul. But when the day of election was now come, and Marcius appeared in the forum with a pompous train of senators attending him, and the patricians all manifested together concern, and seemed to be exerting greater efforts than they had ever done before on the like occasion, the commons then fell off again from the kindness they had conceived for him, and in the place of their late benevolence began to feel something of indignation and envy passions, assisted by the fear they entertained that if a man of such aristocratic temper and so influential among the patricians should be invested with the power which that office would give him, he might employ it to deprive the people of all that liberty which was yet left to them. In conclusion, they rejected Marcius. They rejected Marcius. Two other names were announced, to the great mortification of the senators, who felt if the indignity reflected rather upon themselves than on Marcius, he, for his part, could not bear the affront with any patience. He had always indulged his temper, and had regarded the proud and contentious element of human nature as a sort of nobleness and magnanimity. Reason and discipline had not imbued him with that solidity and equanimity which enters so largely into the virtues of the statesman. He had never learned how essential it is for anyone who undertakes public business and desires to deal with mankind, to avoid above all things that self-will which Plato says belongs to the family of solitude, and to pursue above all things that capacity so generally ridiculed, of submission to ill treatment. Marcius straightforward and direct, and possessed with the idea that to vanquish and overbear all opposition is the true part of bravery, and never imagining that it was the weakness and womanishness of his nature that broke out, so to say, in these ulcerations of anger, retired full of fury and bitterness against the people. The young patricians, too, all that were proudest and most conscious of their noble birth, had always been devoted to his interest, and adhering to him now with a fidelity that did him no good, aggravated his resentment with the expression of their indignation and condolence. He had been their captain and their willing instructor in the arts of war, went out upon expeditions, and their model in that true emulation and love of excellence which makes men extol without envy or jealousy each other's brave achievements. In the midst of these distempers, a large quantity of corn reached Rome, a great part bought up in Italy, but an equal amount sent as a present from Syracuse, from Gello, maybe that's Gello. Then, reigning there, many began now to hope well of their affairs, supposing the city, by this means, would be delivered at once, both of its want and discord. A council, therefore, being presently held, the people came flocking about the Senate House, eagerly awaiting the issue of that deliberation, expecting that the market prices would now be less cruel, and, and that what had come as a gift would be distributed as such. There were some within who so advised the Senate, but Marcius, standing up, sharply inveighed against those who spoke in favor of the multitude, calling them flatterers of the rabble, traitors to the nobility, and alleging that by such gratifications they did but cherish those ill seeds of boldness and petulance that had been sown among the people to their own prejudice, which they should have done well to observe and stifle at their first appearance. Nip it in the bud, folks, and not have suffered the plebeians to grow so strong by granting them magistrates of such authority as the tribunes. They were indeed even now formidable to the state, since everything they desired was granted. No constraint was put on their will. They refused obedience to the consuls, and overthrowing all law and magistracy, gave the title of magistrate to their private factious leaders. When things are come to such a pass for us to sit here and decree largesses and bounties for them, like those Greeks, where the populace is supreme and absolute, what would it be else, he said, but to take their disobedience and to pay and maintain it for the common ruin of us all? They certainly cannot look upon these liberalities as a reward of public service which they know they have so often deserted, nor yet yet of those secessions by which they openly renounce their country, much less the calumnies and slanders they have always so re- been so al- been always so ready to entertain against the Senate, but will rather conclude that a bounty which seems to have no other visible cause or reason must needs be the effect of our fear and flattery, and will therefore set no limit to their disobedience, nor ever cease from disturbances and sedition. That's his theory, folks. In a nutshell, concession is mere madness. If we have, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Concession is mere madness. If we have any wisdom and resolution at all, we shall, on the contrary, never rest till we have recovered from them that tribunician power they have extorted from us, as being a plain subversion of the consulship and a perpetual ground of separation in our city that is no longer one, and therein heretofore, but has in this received such a wound and rupture as is never likely to close and unite again or suffer us to be of one mind, and to give over inflaming our distempers and being a torment to each other. Marcius, with much more to this purpose, succeeded to an extraordinary degree in inspiring the younger men with the same furious sentiments. Kill the poor, kill them. Yeah. We've heard it before, folks. We've heard it before. And had almost all the wealthy on his side, who cried him up as the only person their city had superior alike to force and flattery. Some of the older men, however, opposed him. Some of the older men, however, opposed him, suspecting the consequences, folks. There's going to be consequences. As indeed there came no good of it, for the tribunes who were present, perceiving how the proposal of Marcius took, ran out into the crowd with exclamations, calling the plebeians to stand together and come in by their assistance. The assembly met. They're assembling, a dangerous assembly, and soon became tumultuous. The sum of what Marcius had spoken, having been reported to the people, excited them to such fury that they were ready to break in upon the Senate. The tribunes prevented this by laying all the blame on Coriolanus, whom, therefore, they cited by their messenger to come before them and defend himself. And when he contemptuously repulsed the officers who brought him to the summons, they came themselves with the aediles or overseers of the market, proposing to carry him away by force, and accordingly began to lay hold on his person. The patricians, however, coming to his rescue, not only thrust off the tribunes, but also beat the aediles that were their seconds in the quarrel. Night approaching put an end to the contest, but as soon as it was day, the consuls observing the people to be highly exasperated, and that they ran from all quarters and gathered in the forum, were afraid for the whole city, so that, convening the Senate afresh, they desired them to advise them how they might best compose and pacify the incensed multitude by equitable language and indulgent decrees, since if they wisely considered the state of things, they would find that it was no time to stand upon terms of honor and a mere point of glory. Such a critical conjuncture called for gentle methods and for temperate and humane counsels. The majority, therefore, of the senators giving way, the consuls proceeded to pacify the people in the best manner they were able, answering gently to such imputations and charges as had been cast upon the Senate, and using much tenderness and moderation in the admonitions and reproofs they gave them. On the point of the price of provisions, they said there should be no difference at all between them. When a great part of the commonalty was grown cool and appeared from their orderly and peaceful behavior that they had been very much appeased by what they had heard, the tribunes, standing up, declared in the name of the people that since the Senate was pleased to act soberly and do them reason, they likewise should be ready to yield in all that was fair and equitable on their side. They must insist, however, that Marcius should give in his answer to the several charges as follows. First, could he deny that he instigated the Senate to overthrow the government and annul the privileges of the people? And in the next place, when called to account for it, did he not disobey the summons? And lastly, by the blows of other public affronts to the aediles, had he not done all he could to commence a civil war? These articles were brought in against him with the design either to humble Marcius and show his submission, if contrary to his nature he should now court and sue the people, or if he should follow his natural disposition, when they rather expected from their judgment of his character than that he might thus make the breach final between himself and the people. He came, therefore, as it were, to make his apology and clear himself, in which belief the people kept silent, and gave him a quiet hearing. But when, instead of the submissive and deprecatory language expected from him, he began to use not only an offensive kind of freedom, seeming rather to accuse than apologize, but as well by the tone of his voice as the air of his countenance, displayed a security that was not far from disdain and contempt for them. The whole multitude then became angry, and gave evident signs of impatience and disgust. And Sicinius is acting up again, the most violent of the tribunes, after a little private conference with his colleagues, proceeded solemnly to pronounce before them all Marcius was condemned to die by the tribunes of the people, and bid the aediles take him back to the Tarpeian rock and without delay throw him headlong from the precipice. When they, however, in compliance with the order, came to seize upon his body, many, even of the plebeian party, felt it to be a horrible and extravagant act. The patricians, meantime, wholly beside themselves with distress and horror, hurried up with cries to the rescue, and while some made actual use of their hands to hinder the arrest, and surrounding Marcius, got him in among them, others, as in so great a tumult no good could be done by words, stretched out theirs, beseeching the multitude that they would not proceed to such furious extremities. And at length the friends and acquaintance of the tribunes, wisely perceiving how impossible it would be to carry off Marcius to punishment without much bloodshed and slaughter of the nobility, persuaded them to forbear everything unusual and odious, not to dispatch him by any sudden violence or without regular uh, process, but re- refer the cause to the general suffrage of the people. Sicinius then, after a little pause, turning to the patricians, demanded what their meaning was, thus forcibly to rescue Marcius out of the people's hands, as they were going to punish him. When it was replied by them on the other side, and the question put rather how came it into your minds, and what it is you design thus to drag one of the worthiest men of Rome without trial to a barbarous and illegal execution? Very well, said Sicinius. You shall have no ground in this respect for quarrel or complaint against the people. The people grant your request, and your partisans shall be tried. We appoint you, Marcius, directing his speech to him, the third market day ensuing, to appear and defend yourself, and to try if you can to satisfy the Roman citizens of your innocence, who will then judge your case by a vote. The patricians were content with such a truce and respite for that time, and gladly returned home, having for the present brought off Marcius in safety. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of the next thrilling episode of the astounding, mysterious, and amazing, strange, inimitable cow from another world with bedtime stories show thing that this is. Tune in next time for the next section of the chapter of the installment of Coriolanus, for your edification and education, and to impart wisdom, folks, because you know you wouldn't have read it if you hadn't come to the cow. So until that time, goodbye.